Vienna, 1901. Just as the bells of St. Stephen's Cathedral tolled noon and the scent of roasted chestnuts drifted through the coal-marked, Zaira Rosewood stood outside the gates of Palais Neulandt, her fingers chapped from scrubbing marble steps since dawn, her apron stiff with drying suds. She should have gone straight to the servants' quarters after delivering the fresh linen upstairs, but the sight beyond the wrought iron caught her sunlight falling like gold across the private gardens where the Duke's bride, Lady Evelyn, twirled in practice for her wedding waltz. A man stood on the stone path, tall, too still for a noble, yet dressed too finely for a servant. His eyes were on the bride, but his jaw was tight. Zaira shifted her laundry basket, hoping to go unnoticed. "You're lingering," he said without turning. His voice was low, clipped, and unmistakably American. Zaira straightened. "My apologies, sir. I didn't mean to." "You're not in trouble," he said, now glancing at her. "Just curious, aren't you?" She didn't answer. The man's coat was tailored but slightly worn, his boots polished but softened with use. He was not of the nobility, not truly, though he stood within their walls. His eyes deep-set and unreadable landed on her again. "I'm Lucian Northwood," he said, "the Duke's secretary, and tutor to his future wife." Zaira blinked. "You teach Lady Evelyn? She needs to know court history. How to read Latin. Enough to not embarrass the family. And you?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Do you belong to the family?" Lucian's smile was brief and without joy. "I belong to no one here." Zaira dropped her gaze. "Then we have that in common." The laundry basket shifted in her arms, and a sheet slipped loose. Lucian took one step forward and caught the edge before it could touch the muddy path. "May I help you carry that?" he asked. Zaira hesitated. She should say no. It was not proper. But her arms ached, and something in him, something strained and unspoken, made her nod. They walked in silence along the servants' path. Gravel crunched beneath their feet, the winter roses drooping on their stems. "Where are you from?" he asked. "Georgia," she said. "Savannah." Lucian looked at her, surprised. "I'm from Charleston." The corners of her mouth lifted. Then we're both far from home. The next time she saw him, it was in the library. She had been sent to dust the shelves, but paused when she heard a voice reading aloud. Latin, clear and slow. She stepped in quietly and found him alone, sitting cross-legged on the carpet with a book open in his lap. A candle flickered beside him. "You're early," he said without looking up. "I wasn't coming to see you," she replied quickly. "You came anyway." Zaira flushed. Lucian stood, closing the book. "I don't think Lady Evelyn will care much for Cicero. She's not interested in dead men's speeches." "Then why bother?" Zaira asked. "Because it's my duty." She stepped closer. "Do you believe in duty?" He looked at her then, steady and quiet. "I did." Zaira didn't move. Her hands were still, her breath even. "And now?" "I believe in promises," he said. "I made one once. To my mother. That I would never be owned again." Zaira nodded, understanding more than he knew. Her voice dropped. "I made a promise to." "To who?" "My brother. Before he died. That I'd never let anyone make me small." Lucian's gaze held hers. The candle between them flickered. The snow came early that year. By mid-November, the city was blanketed in white. Fires roared in the Palais hearths, and wedding preparations filled every hall with lace, perfume, and tension. Zaira was polishing silver when Evelyn burst into the scullery, red-faced and furious. "Where is he?" she demanded. Zaira froze. "Who, milady?" "Lucian. He was supposed to teach me the genealogy of the Habsburgs. Instead, he sends a note saying, 'Do your own reading.' I'll have him dismissed." Zaira kept her eyes lowered. "I'm sure he meant no disrespect. Don't defend him. He's just a servant with a better coat." Evelyn stormed out, her heels clicking on the tile. Zaira waited until the silence returned before slipping out the back and up the narrow servant stairs to the attic where Lucian often retreated. He was there, shirt sleeves rolled, ink on his fingers, staring out the window toward the Danube. "She's going to report you," Zaira said softly. "I know. You'll be dismissed." Lucian didn't turn. "That may be for the best." Zaira stepped forward. "You don't mean that." "I do," he said. "I can't keep pretending to care about their dinners and dances. And I can't keep pretending I don't see you." Zaira's breath caught. "I know it's impossible," he said. "But every time I pass you in the corridor, every time you look at me like I'm not just another coat with a title, I forget what's expected of me." Zaira walked to him, slowly. "You're not the only one forgetting." He turned to her. Snow gathered on the window ledge behind him, and the room held its breath. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. She didn't. His hand reached for hers, bare and calloused. Fingers laced, quiet and firm. No kiss. No grand gesture, just the promise of something neither of them had dared to believe they could have. That night, Zaira returned to her quarters to find a folded piece of paper tucked beneath her pillow. No name, no signature, just 4 words in tight, neat script. "I will not leave." They met in stolen corners after that. In linen closets, empty hallways, snow-dusted courtyards. They never kissed, never touched beyond a brush of fingers or a shoulder leaned too close. But in the quiet, they made something real. Lucian taught her Latin. She taught him how to plait rope. He showed her the stars from the attic window. She showed him how to make lemon bread with scraps from the kitchen. And then, one morning, a letter arrived bearing the royal seal. The Duke of Salzburg had agreed to the match. The wedding was to be held in 3 weeks. All guests of the Viennese court were to attend, including Emperor Franz Joseph himself. Evelyn would become a duchess. Lucian would be dismissed. And Zaira would be forgotten. Unless they did something. Unless they broke every rule. Lucian met her in the servants' garden that night, the air sharp with frost. "I've written a letter to the Archduke," he said. "I challenged him to a duel." Zaira's mouth parted. "Lucian, he insulted me. Called me a half-blood mutt in front of Evelyn." I answered with a glove across his face. She stared at him. "You'll be killed." "I won't lose," he said. "I was raised by fighters. And I have something worth living for." Her chest ached. "Me?" He nodded. "Say the word, Zaira. If I win, I'll take you from here. We'll leave Vienna. Go back to America. Start over. And if you lose, then I'll die having loved you." She stepped into his arms and pressed her forehead to his. "You made me a promise," she whispered. "I'll keep it," he said. At dawn, the duel took place in the old walled orchard behind the Palais stables, just before the first light bled into the sky. No one official bore witness, only the groom, who had once served in the cavalry and agreed to stand as second for Lucian, and a stable hand pressed into silence with a coin and a stare. Zaira waited beneath the covered arch of the icehouse, her breath shallow, hands hidden in her sleeves. She had not slept. Her body still carried the scent of hearth soot and beeswax, but her mind stayed with Lucian's last words to her, words that had not promised easy escape, only a future chosen. The Archduke arrived late, his boots crunching frost, a cigarette still glowing between his fingers. He tossed it aside without looking, his coat open despite the cold. Lucian faced him without gloves, his breath a steady plume. Neither man spoke when they took their paces. The blades were old dueling sabers, dulled with time, but sharpened for this. Zaira couldn't see all of it, only slivers between hedges, the glint of steel, the sudden hiss of metal scraping cloth. One lunge, then another. Lucian circled wider. The Archduke moved with lazy arrogance, as if the outcome were already his. Then a sharp cry. Lucian's sleeve tore. Blood soaked quickly through white linen, but he didn't falter. He twisted, pivoted, then drove forward as the Archduke stumbled back. Steel met flesh. The Archduke collapsed in the snow with a groan, clutching his side. Not fatal, but deep. Lucian stood over him, chest heaving, saber lowered. "I yield," the Archduke muttered, voice tight with pain. No cheers followed. The groom helped the Archduke to his feet, and the stable hand retrieved both blades. Lucian turned toward the orchard gate, not glancing back. Zaira met him beneath the archway. He was pale, but upright. "You're hurt," she said, her voice low. "I'll live." She unwrapped the cloth from her wrist and pressed it to the cut. "You shouldn't have gone for the arm." "I didn't go for anything," he said. But he was slower than pride thinks. He winced as she tied the fabric tight. His eyes didn't leave hers. "I told you I wouldn't leave," he said. "Let's go before the Palais wakes." They didn't go far, not yet. Lucian knew a retired cartwright in Alsergrund, a man who owed him a favor from the summer he'd helped translate a patent for a new axle design. The man's attic was cold and slanted, but dry. He let them stay on the condition that Zaira would help his wife with the mending. Lucian's wound stiffened by the second morning. Zaira boiled water with juniper and stitched the tear without waiting for his permission. "You should have told me you were losing blood," she said, not unkindly. "You were already worried," he said through clenched teeth. "I didn't want to make you afraid." She didn't answer. only dipped her cloth again and pressed it firm. Later, they sat by the small window, knees touching beneath the blanket. The city stretched beyond them, chimneys, frost-blurred roofs, and the long snake of the Danube curling east. Lucian broke the silence first. I have a cousin in Bremen. He runs a printing press. He might take us in. Zaira nodded. And then we book passage west. There's a ship leaving Hamburg in 3 weeks. I can pay for 2 steerage fares if I sell my watch. She looked down at the worn edge of the timepiece chain still tucked in his vest. You carried that through the war? He nodded. My father's. She traced the edge of the blanket. I won't let it buy my place. Lucian's brows drew together. I've saved too, she said. I kept half my wages in the stove flue behind the scullery. It's not much, but enough for 1 fare. His expression softened. Then we go together. 3 days later, a letter arrived at the Cartwright's doorstep, hand-delivered by a boy no older than 12. The envelope bore no seal, only fine script on the front. For the gentleman injured in the orchard. Lucian opened it with care. Zaira watched his eyes move, his jaw tighten. It's from Evelyn, he said. She won't name me. Not to the Duke, not to the Emperor. She says her pride demands silence. Zaira folded her hands. She still intends to marry? Yes. And she'll say the Archduke tripped on ice. He handed her the letter. She's not cruel. Just careful. Zaira read the note once. The paper smelled faintly of rose water. She's giving you a gift, she said quietly. She doesn't know it. Zaira folded the letter again and set it aside. Lucian leaned closer. We could leave tonight, he said. The Cartwright has a cousin who drives coal shipments north. She nodded. Then we'll go. He brushed her hand with his. The touch was new, gentle, not careful. She didn't pull away. I never thought I'd be the sort of man who ran, he said. And I never thought I'd be the sort of woman who stayed, she replied. He looked at her, breath held. But I will, she added. If it's with you. The night fell heavy, but their hearts were light. For the first time in either of their lives, they had chosen not survival, but possibility. The coal cart pulled them north along the Danube's frozen edge, the wheels groaning beneath its weight and the horses steaming in the icy dawn. Zaira sat beside Lucian, wrapped in a patched wool throw from the Cartwright's wife, her gloved fingers hidden beneath its folds, one hand resting lightly on his knee. Behind them, Vienna shrank into a blur of gray roofs and copper domes, the Kaiserstadt fading into memory. They spoke little during the ride. Lucian's arm, bound in fresh muslin, rested in his lap. Each jolt of the cart made him wince, but he never turned away when Zaira looked at him. By the time they reached Krems, the road had iced over, and the driver refused to go farther until the thaw. They offered him the last of their coin for shelter in a hay barn behind a tavern, where the innkeeper's wife looked the other way, so long as they kept to the far corner. That night, Zaira knelt by the oil lamp, her hands working a torn seam in Lucian's coat. He watched her, his brow shadowed. Do you ever miss the old world? He asked. She didn't glance up. Which one? The one before Vienna. Before the Palais. Before you were given a number instead of a name. Zaira set down the needle. I remember the marshes, she said, and the way the wind moved through the reeds. I remember the hush before thunder. She looked at him. But I don't miss the silence after my brother was buried, or the way I stopped singing. Lucian reached forward. Then sing now. There was no music in the barn, only the soft crackle of the lamp and the distant stomp of hooves from the tavern yard. But Zaira hummed, low and rough, a tune born from somewhere deep and long buried. Her voice faltered, then steadied. Lucian closed his eyes. In the morning, word came that ice had cracked along the ridges south of Linz. The cart moved again, slow but certain. At each village, Zaira traded small stitches for bread, mending a collar here, reattaching a cuff there. Lucian offered translations in 3 languages to merchant clerks who needed letters read aloud. At a tavern near Amstetten, a bookseller gave them a warm supper in exchange for Lucian reciting the parable of the prodigal son in Latin and German for his daughters. They reached Linz by foot, the last stretch taken along the riverbank in silence. There, in the shadow of the city's old cathedral, they found a wooden boarding house run by a widow with 3 sons abroad. She offered them the attic in exchange for teaching her youngest to read. It was in that room, with the frost-etching lace patterns on the glass and the floorboards creaking with every step, that Lucian turned to Zaira after hanging his coat by the stove. Do you still believe we'll make it to Bremen? he asked. She nodded. I believe in your maps. And my hands. He stepped closer. We have no money. We have your books, my needle, and the goodwill of people who still understand hunger. Lucian leaned his forehead to hers. I've never been loved without needing to earn it. You're not earning it, she said. You're sharing it. His hand found hers, not trembling now, but steady. Her pulse answered in kind. There was no rush in their closeness. No hunger born of fear, only the warmth of something rooted and growing. That night, Lucian wrote a letter to the cousin in Bremen, requesting shelter and work. Zaira stitched a small linen pouch for their remaining coins, wrapping it in cloth and tucking it into the lining of her boot. Days passed. The snow melted into slush, and the streets turned to mud. Lucian taught the widow's son arithmetic. Zaira helped the woman catalog her husband's books for sale. In the quiet hours, they shared bread by the stove and spoke of the sea. What will you do there? Zaira asked once, her head against his shoulder. I want to build something, Lucian said. Not with words. With my hands. A press, maybe. A house. She smiled. And I want to plant a garden. Tomatoes. Cabbage. Something that grows even when the soil is hard. Lucian pressed a kiss to her temple, reverent and slow. When the letter from Bremen arrived, it was carried by a merchant heading south. The cousin had space above the workshop and agreed to take them in. A place to sleep, food twice a day, and wages enough to begin. Zaira stood at the window, the letter in her hand. We leave at first light, Lucian said. She turned to him. Then let me pack the bread. They did not speak of what had been left behind. Not the Palais. Not the names they no longer answered to. They had walked through rooms where their voices were not meant to echo, and now, each step forward was a claiming of space. As they crossed into the north on foot, the road widened. Ahead lay Bremen, the sea beyond that. Behind, the echo of titles and thresholds faded with the wind. Lucian reached for her hand. Zaira took it, and did not let go. The wind off the Weser smelled of salt and coal as Zaira stepped onto the uneven paving stones outside Otto Northwood's print shop. The shutters were drawn against the March chill, but beneath them, presses clinked and thudded in a rhythm that reminded her of distant trains. She adjusted the scarf over her hair, the sky above her gauzy with low clouds. Inside, Lucian stood by the composing table, sleeves rolled to the elbows, speaking low with Otto, a broad-shouldered man with a soot-dark beard and a missing fingertip. The shop smelled of ink and oiled wood. A boy no older than 8 was feeding paper into the platen press, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. Zaira waited until Otto stepped away to inspect a stack of broadsheets before approaching. Did he say how long will be needed? She asked in a low voice. Lucian leaned over the tray of type, fingers sorting letters into rows. Until the Printers Guild election. He wants us here through summer. Maybe longer, if the new contracts come through. She nodded, gaze drifting to the drying lines overhead where leaflets hung clipped by their corners. He's trusting us quickly. Lucian's voice stayed even. He never had children of his own. My mother was the youngest of 6. He remembers her voice better than her face. Zaira touched the edge of the table. And you? I remember her hands. And the way she never folded a letter without pressing the crease flat with her thumbnail. Otto called from the back stairwell. Frau Rosewood, my wife wants your opinion on the stitch work. She's not sure about the collar edge. Zaira wiped her palms on her skirt, then followed the voice upstairs to the rooms above the shop. The air there was warmer, thick with the scent of boiled starch and lavender sachets. A basket of linen shirts sat by the hearth, half mended. Helene Northwood, quiet-eyed and methodical, stood beside them with a thimble balanced on her finger. He wears through cuffs faster than any man I've seen, she said, handing Zaira a needle. But he won't part with them. Zaira inspected the frayed seam. I can reinforce it without changing the line. He won't notice until the 3rd washing. Helene gave a rare smile. Then you've already done better than I have in 20 years. Later that night, after the lamps were doused and the presses silenced, Lucian carried a bucket of coals up to the attic room they shared. He set it gently in the brazier, coaxing the embers until the air lost its edge. Zaira sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting threads by thickness, her braid loose down her back. I saw a woman outside the fishmonger's this morning, she said. She was selling violets from a paper cone. Said her family used to own land east of Hamburg. Now they sleep 4 to a room. Lucian dropped a coal into the brazier with the tongs. The empire's eating itself. Railroads on one end, factories on the other. The middle's been hollowed out. Zaira wound a length of gray thread around her fingers. She asked if I could read. I told her yes. She offered me a coin to read her husband's discharge papers. Lucian looked up. And did you? I didn't take the coin. He crossed the floor and sat beside her. You still carry the tin comb, he said, not as a question. She met his gaze. It's the only thing I kept from the Palais. Lucian leaned back on his hands. I still have the cufflink. Just one. The other got lost in the snow. Zaira set the thread aside and reached for his hand. We should find a place of our own. He didn't answer immediately, then said, There's a room above the pub on Hansietenstrasse. Otto mentioned it yesterday. Does it have a stove? And a latch that locks, he added. He said the landlady's deaf and doesn't ask questions. Zaira pressed her head against his shoulder. Then it sounds perfect. That weekend, they moved in with 2 boxes, a kettle, and a threadbare quilt Zaira had finished the week before. The room overlooked the alley between the tavern and the soap makers, but the walls were solid, and the window let in the morning light. Zaira arranged their plates on a narrow shelf beside the sink. Lucian stacked his books beneath the window. They ate supper cross-legged on the floor, boiled potatoes with nutmeg and a heel of bread. When the church bells tolled midnight, Lucian took her hand and led her to the center of the room. No music played, but they swayed slowly, his hand pressed between her shoulder blades, hers resting at his collar. Do you remember her dress? Zaira asked softly. Evelyn's. Yes. I remember it rustled when she walked. Like dry leaves. Zaira's fingers curled lightly at his neck. Mine rustled too. When I left the scullery that morning, I thought someone would hear me. Lucian stopped moving. But you walked anyway. She nodded. Because you were waiting. He kissed her then. No urgency. No fear. Just warmth, and a vow kept. And somewhere below, the city turned gently toward spring.